For 7 long years, people believed she was gone forever. Her family had held a small memorial. Her friends had cried until their eyes could not cry anymore. And the aviation world had marked her name as lost with no trace. But life has a strange way of hiding truths, and sometimes it waits for the right moment to bring them back into the light. No one on that flight knew that today was the day one of the world's quietest mysteries would begin to unfold. It started like any other morning. The aircraft stood on the runway under a soft sky, waiting to carry more than 100 passengers to their destination. Among them was a man in his late 40s, sitting quietly in the aisle seat, holding a small gift-wrapped box on his lap. He looked tired, like someone who carried a heavy memory. No one noticed him much, and he didn't speak to anyone, but his eyes stayed fixed on the cockpit door, as if it reminded him of someone he once knew. The cabin soon filled with the usual sounds: seatbelts clicking, bags being pushed into overhead bins, children laughing, and flight attendants greeting passengers with practiced, gentle smiles. Everything felt normal, almost boring in the way a routine flight usually feels. But the truth was already hiding inside that plane, somewhere. In a place no one expected. The engines roared, the aircraft began to climb, and passengers settled into quiet conversation. The man with the gift closed his eyes, remembering the day he was told she had disappeared. The last message he had ever received from her was short and calm, too calm for someone who later vanished mid-air. Sometimes he wondered if he had missed a sign, a clue, anything. 7 years later, he still carried that regret like a shadow. The flight continued smoothly for the first hour. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. Some passengers read books, others watched the clouds, and some simply relaxed. The attendants walked the aisle offering water. Everything appeared peaceful. Then the intercom crackled. At first, no one thought much of it. Maybe a small announcement. Maybe turbulence ahead. But instead of the captain's usual confident voice, there was only silence. A strange silence that made people slowly look up from their seats. A flight attendant hurried toward the cockpit. A few seconds later, another attendant followed. Passengers exchanged confused glances. Something didn't feel right, but no one wanted to say it out loud. The man with the gift felt a strange pressure in his chest. He knew enough about flying to understand that delays in communication from the cockpit were rarely good. He watched the attendants carefully. Their steps were quick, their faces pale, and they whispered to each other in low, stressed voices. Then, the door opened slightly, just enough for the passengers in the front to notice the problem. The captain was slumped in his seat. The co-pilot was trying to sit up, but looked dizzy, sweating heavily. A ripple of fear moved through the cabin. A few people gasped. Others sat frozen, unsure of what to do. The attendants tried to stay calm, but their hands were shaking. The man in the aisle seat stood up slowly, more out of instinct than courage. He wasn't a pilot, but he knew that losing control of the cockpit at such an altitude could put everyone in danger. Still, he didn't move forward yet. Something inside him whispered that he shouldn't approach. Not yet. Something else was about to happen. The plane suddenly tilted a little, just enough for bags to shift and a few passengers to grab their armrests. A child began to cry. A mother hugged her toddler tightly. And the attendants looked like they were running out of ideas. Is there anyone on board who can help? One attendant finally called out, her voice breaking slightly. Passengers turned to each other, confused, scared, helpless. And then, a faint sound came from behind the cockpit door, not from the pilots, not from the attendants. A soft click. Like someone unlocking something from inside. The man with the gift stopped breathing for a moment. The sound was too familiar, like something he had heard years before. His heart began to race. Not from fear, but from a feeling he couldn't explain, something between hope and disbelief. The attendant stepped back as the cockpit door, which had been locked tightly from the inside, began to shift. Slowly, carefully. as if someone from the other side was pushing it open. Passengers stared in shock. Who was inside? How did they get there? The door opened a little more, and a shadow appeared in the small gap. A slim figure stepped into view, calm, steady, and strangely confident, as though she had been waiting for this exact moment. Gasps filled the cabin. People blinked, unsure if they were imagining it. The man with the gift felt his knees weaken, because the figure standing in the cockpit doorway was her. The same woman the world had believed dead for 7 long years. Her face looked older, wiser, and marked by stories no one could guess. But it was her, alive, breathing, and standing where no one expected her to be. The cabin fell completely silent. Every passenger stared in disbelief. The man with the gift whispered only one word under his breath, one he hadn't spoken in years. Impossible. But it wasn't impossible. She was alive, and she had chosen this moment to return. The moment she stepped out of the cockpit, the entire cabin froze. People stared as if they were looking at a ghost, someone returning from a place no human returns from. For 7 years, her story had been nothing but a painful headline lost in the skies. No remains found, presumed gone forever. And now she was standing here, calm, breathing, and strangely in control. The plane's soft hum was the only sound for a few seconds. Even the crying child from earlier stopped, as if sensing something extraordinary was happening. She looked around the cabin slowly, her eyes landing on every frightened face, every trembling hand gripping an armrest. There was something about her presence, steady, controlled, almost trained, not like someone who had suddenly appeared, but like someone who had planned this moment carefully. One of the flight attendants took a small step forward. Her voice shook. "Ma'am, how did you?" The cockpit, it was locked from inside. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gently pushed the cockpit door fully open, revealing the pilots behind her. They were still conscious but looking weak, as if they had suddenly lost their strength. She moved toward them with quick, precise steps. "Help me lift him," she said simply. Her voice carried a calm authority that made even the panicked attendant obey without thinking. Together, they shifted the captain into a safer position, leaning him upright and opening the collar of his uniform so he could breathe more easily. The co-pilot's condition seemed slightly better, but he was disoriented and unable to focus. Passengers were whispering, now soft, confused, shocked. Whispers traveling through the aisles. Who is she? Wasn't she gone? How can someone appear inside a locked cockpit? Is this real? The man with the gift felt his heart pounding harder than it had in years. His hands trembled around the small box he still held. He knew her walk. He knew the way she pushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. He knew the slight tilt of her head when she examined a problem. He knew her, but how could she be here? And where had she been for 7 years? The mystery thickened when she finally looked up at him. Her eyes met his, only for a second, but the weight of that second was enough to steal the air from his lungs. She recognized him. He could see it, behind the calm expression, behind the control she was forcing herself to maintain. She knew exactly who he was, but she turned away quickly, as if now was not the time for questions or reunions. "Someone bring me the emergency kit," she said firmly. A passenger rushed to hand it over. She took it with a steady hand, opening it with practiced speed, checking the captain's pulse again, and then helping the co-pilot breathe properly. Her movements were not random. She had training. Real training, but she wasn't a doctor. No. She was someone who used to sit in a cockpit long before she disappeared. The man finally gathered the courage to move closer. "You're alive," he whispered, barely able to say the words. She didn't look at him. She kept focusing on the controls, checking switches and screens. Her hands moving like muscle memory, had always been waiting for this moment. "We don't have time to talk," she said quietly. Her tone wasn't cold, it was protective, focused. almost like she was shielding him from something much bigger than this moment. "What happened to the pilots?" he asked. "Not now," she replied softly. Still not meeting his eyes, her avoidance only made the mystery grow heavier. She wasn't just hiding where she had been. She was hiding something about this flight. She took a deep breath and stepped fully into the cockpit, signaling the attendants to close the door halfway behind her. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, trying to see. The attendants exchanged looks, unsure if they should stop her. But there was something about her certainty that made it feel wrong to interfere. The man watched her as she touched the controls carefully at first, then with growing confidence. The aircraft steadied itself slightly, the earlier tilt slowly. Correcting. A wave of relief moved through the passengers, though the fear still stayed heavy in the air. One attendant whispered to the man, "Do you know her?" He swallowed. "I once did." The attendant's eyes widened. "She's the missing pilot, isn't she? The one from the news?" He didn't answer, but the silence said enough. 7 years ago, she vanished mid-flight, leaving behind no signal, no debris, no explanation. Experts had argued for months. Some said mechanical failure. Some blamed weather. Some suggested a hijacking. But nothing matched the last radar reading. She had disappeared from the sky as if the world had swallowed her whole, and now she was flying a plane again, inside the cockpit. She pressed the communication switch, but instead of calling the control tower, she hesitated. A strange look crossed her face, like she was weighing a choice that could change everything. The man noticed it instantly. Something was wrong, something she wasn't saying. The co-pilot tried to speak, but his voice was too weak. She leaned close to him, listening. His whisper made her expression change again, just slightly, but enough for the man to see the fear she was trying to hide behind her calm exterior. She straightened, then looked toward the cabin once more. Her voice was steady, but tense. "I need everyone to stay calm," she said. "We're not in immediate danger, but I must take control of the aircraft, right now." The passengers stared at her. Why must she take control? What wasn't she telling them? The mystery of her disappearance was only the beginning. What she knew and why she appeared at this exact moment was far more shocking. Asterisk. The passengers stared at her through the half-open cockpit door, unable to process what was happening. Someone they believed gone for 7 years was now standing in front of them, touching the same control she once touched before she vanished from the world. The air inside the plane felt different, now thicker, colder, filled with questions. No one dared ask. She checked the stabilizers, recalibrated the attitude control, and adjusted the throttle with quick precision. Her movements were fast but careful, almost like she was working against a countdown only she knew existed. The man with the gift stepped a little closer, unable to stay seated anymore. Something inside him refused to ignore the tension in her shoulders, the worry hidden behind her calm eyes. "What aren't you telling us?" he asked softly. She didn't answer at first. Instead, she checked the flight path again, then glanced at the co-pilot, who looked slightly better but still weak. She whispered something to him, something only he could hear. His eyes widened, confusion and fear mixing in his expression. She turned back toward the man. This time she looked directly at him. "Please, don't ask questions here," she said quietly. "Not yet." It was the same tone she used years ago whenever she tried to protect him from bad news. It was soft, almost gentle, but full of weight. It was a tone that meant, "There is more, and you are not ready for it." The man tightened his grip on the small box in his hands. He had carried it for 7 years, through holidays, through lonely nights, through the pain of losing her. And now, she was telling him not to ask questions. But how could he not? Passengers in the first rows began whispering again. Why is she flying? Is she even allowed? Where was she all these years? Is something wrong with the plane? The flight attendant tried to calm them, but even she kept glancing at the cockpit with worried eyes. When she saw the man standing there, she stepped close and whispered, "Please ask her what happened." "We can't stay in the dark," he nodded slowly. He had to try again, but before he could speak, the woman touched a switch near the overhead panel, and the cockpit door closed the rest of the way, not locked, but closed enough to create a barrier. It was a signal that she needed space, at least for now. The man stepped back, feeling a strange mix of frustration and worry. Why wouldn't she talk? What was she hiding from the passengers? And from him? Inside the cockpit, she took a slow breath and looked at the co-pilot. "Try to stay awake," she said softly. "I don't understand," he whispered. "Why did it hit us so fast?" "I'll explain when you're stable," she replied. But the man outside caught that single word hit, and it sent a chill through him. Something had affected the pilots. Something sudden, unexpected, and not yet explained. A few moments later, she activated a manual override on the navigation panel. The flight attendants gasped. Passengers sat upright, gripping their seats again. "What is she doing now?" Someone whispered. The man felt a knot forming in his chest. He wanted to trust her. He had always trusted her, but the uncertainty was eating at him. She pushed a button that switched the autopilot mode. The screens flickered for a second before stabilizing. Then she opened the cockpit door again, just enough for her voice to be heard. "I need everyone calm," she said. Her voice was stronger now, more certain. "The pilots are recovering. I have taken temporary control of the aircraft. We will remain stable, but I need your cooperation." A woman in the front row raised a trembling hand. "Where were you all these years?" The question hit the cabin like a spark. Everyone leaned forward. Everyone wanted the answer. Even the man with the gift held his breath, but she shook her head slowly. "That story is not for this moment." "But why now?" The woman insisted. "Why appear suddenly here today?" The pilot, once lost, once mourned, looked out at the rows of scared faces. Her eyes softened for a moment. "Because this flight was never supposed to take off like this," she said quietly. "And someone knew I would be here." A ripple of shock moved through the cabin. Someone knew? How? Why? The man stepped closer again. "Are we in danger?" She paused. The silence stretched, heavy and painful. Then she answered with words that only created more questions. "You're safer with me in this cockpit than without me." Passengers exchanged fearful glances. Even the flight attendants looked unsure. What that meant. The co-pilot behind her cleared his throat weakly. "Did you know this would happen?" She closed her eyes for a moment, then whispered, "I hoped it wouldn't." The man felt his stomach twist. Whatever she had returned from, whatever she had lived through these 7 years, it had followed her onto this plane. And now over 100 people were flying straight into a mystery she had been carrying alone. She reached for the communication system again. This time she lifted the small mic closer to her mouth. The passengers waited, thinking she would finally speak to the control tower, but instead, she switched the frequency to one that wasn't familiar, one that wasn't normally used by commercial aircraft. The man's heart dropped. She wasn't calling for help. She was calling someone who already knew. She was alive. And someone who was waiting for her voice. Asterisk. The unfamiliar radio frequency crackled softly in the cockpit, a low sound that passengers could not fully hear. But the man standing closest felt the tension rise inside the aircraft like a slow-building storm. The woman who had returned from 7 years of silence held the microphone close to her lips, but she did not speak yet. Her eyes stayed fixed on the small screen that showed the unusual frequency number. She seemed afraid to say the first word, afraid of what or who might answer. The man felt the urge to step forward and stop her. He didn't know why, but something about the way she hesitated felt wrong. Not dangerous, just heavy like. The past was standing on the other side of that frequency, waiting to step back into her life. Passengers waited in tense silence. The co-pilot watched her too, struggling to stay upright. "Are you sure?" he whispered. "No," she replied honestly. "But I can't stay quiet anymore." Then, slowly, she pressed the button. Her voice was calm, but too calm, like someone forcing their heartbeat to slow down. "This is..." She paused, unsure if she should say her real name. "This is..." The missing flight officer reporting in. The radio went silent. Every second felt like a minute. The man's breath caught in his chest. Even the passengers at the back sensed something strange was happening, though they didn't know the details. Then the radio finally responded. A faint, tired voice came through, old, worn, like someone who had been waiting far too long. "You're early." Her hands trembled slightly. The man froze. "Early? Early for what?" The co-pilot leaned forward in confusion. "Who is that? What does he mean early?" She didn't answer. Her shoulders tightened. Her eyes locked on the panel as if searching for hidden reassurance. The voice continued, clearer and colder this time. "We expected you tomorrow. But I suppose you never liked following orders." Passengers could not hear the words clearly, but they heard the tone, strange, distant, unsettling. She lowered the mic. "Stop talking like I'm still part of this," she whispered into the receiver. "It ended 7 years ago." "That's not how endings work here," the voice replied. A small shiver went down her spine. The man stepped closer now, unable to hold back. "What is going on? Who are you talking to? And why are they expecting you?" She finally looked at him, and the pain in her eyes was real, human, deep. "The day my plane disappeared," she began softly, "I sent one last message, not to the tower, not to my family, to them." "Who are they?" he asked quietly. Before she could answer, the radio cut in sharply. "Is your aircraft secure?" Her jaw tensed. She didn't want to answer, but she slowly pressed the button again. "Yes," she said. For now, the voice repeated, thoughtful. "Good. We don't want another accident." The co-pilot's eyes widened. "Accident? What accident? Why did the pilots collapse earlier?" But she closed the radio channel quickly, as if afraid passengers might hear more. She leaned back in the pilot's seat, running a hand over her face in silent exhaustion. For the first time since she appeared, she looked fragile, not physically, but emotionally, like someone who had been holding a truth inside for too long. The man kneeled next to her seat. "You have to tell me," he insisted quietly. "You owe me that much." Her eyes met his, and this time she didn't look away. "When my plane vanished 7 years ago," she said, "it didn't crash. It didn't lose power. It didn't go down in a storm." Passengers nearby leaned forward now, their senses alert, drawn in by her low, soft voice. I turned the radio to that same frequency, the one I just used now. Her voice shook lightly, and someone responded. Someone who shouldn't exist in the normal system. Someone who knew things about our aircraft, things no outsider should know. The man felt his heart pounding harder. What happened after that? She looked down at her hands that once held a different control panel. On a different flight, on a day she never stopped reliving. They told me to follow a heading, a new path. Away from the tower, away from radar, away from everything. "Why? Would you listen?" he whispered. Her voice cracked invisibly. "Because they said a disaster was coming. Something that would take more than 100 lives. They said I could stop it. If I followed them." The cabin felt colder now. Passengers were no longer just scared, now they were invested, hanging onto every word. "I didn't know if they were lying," she said softly, "but I chose to trust them. And when I followed their heading, the sky changed." The man felt chills run down his arms. "Changed how?" She slowly shook her head. "I can't explain it in normal words. It felt like flying into a place that didn't belong to any map. A place that didn't want to be found." Passengers gasped quietly. The man breathed out slowly. And that's where you've been all these years? Yes. Her voice broke for a moment. 7 years in a place where time doesn't move the way it should. Where radios only open when someone else decides. The co-pilot whispered, stunned, "But why return today? Why this flight?" She looked at the man beside her, her expression filled with something between fear and determination. Because she swallowed. The same thing that happened to my pilot 7 years ago just happened again today. The man felt his entire body freeze. Something or someone had reached into this aircraft, and she was the only one who knew what was coming next. The man stood frozen beside her seat. His breath shallow, his thoughts running in every direction at once. The passengers behind him had gone silent again, not the kind of silence that comes from calm, but the kind that grows when people sense a truth too big to understand. The woman in the cockpit, the one they all believed gone for 7 years, kept her hand on the controls. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice, when she spoke again, was steady. "What affected the pilots today," she said softly, "is the same thing that happened before my plane disappeared." Passengers exchanged confused looks. The co-pilot swallowed hard, trying to sit straighter. But why only the pilots? Why not everyone else? Her eyes lowered. "That's the part I still don't fully understand. But whatever it is, it targets people trained to fly." A low murmur spread through the cabin. A mother held her child closer. A man at the window seat looked out nervously, as if expecting to see something unusual in the sky. The man with the gift leaned closer. "So you knew this might happen?" She didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. She just stared straight ahead. "I hoped it wouldn't," she whispered. "But I also knew that if I ever heard that frequency again, it meant something had started." The co-pilot's voice shook. "Started? Started what?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she checked the altitude, adjusted the heading by a few degrees, and then slowly reached for a switch that was rarely touched in normal flights. The switch opened an auxiliary navigation display, not meant for regular use. The man frowned. "That display? I've never seen that on commercial planes." "You wouldn't," she replied. "It's not supposed to be used unless you've been instructed." "Instructed by who?" he asked. She hesitated. By now, the passengers didn't bother pretending not to listen. Their fear had turned into a sort of collective curiosity, one that pulled them closer to every soft word spoken in the cockpit. "Finally," she said, "by the same people who contacted me 7 years ago." The co-pilot stared at her with disbelief. "Are you saying someone outside aviation trained you? Communicated with you?" "No," she whispered. "Not outside aviation. Outside us? Outside everything we consider normal." A chill moved through the passengers like a wave, but she wasn't trying to frighten them. She was trying to be honest, finally honest, after 7 years of silence. The man with the gift stepped closer. "Tell me what happened there. Tell me where you went." She took a slow breath. "You won't believe it. I believed you were gone," he said quietly. "And yet here you are." Her eyes softened. A moment of old connection, deep, painful, familiar, passed between them. Then she looked at the co-pilot. "When we followed that heading 7 years ago," she said, "we reached a point where our instruments stopped matching the world outside. The air pressure changed. The horizon changed. Even the color of the sky changed. Just slightly, but enough that we knew." "Knew what?" The co-pilot whispered. "That we weren't supposed to be there." The man felt goosebumps rise on his skin. Passengers leaned in closer. "That place was watching us," she said, her voice low, careful, not like a person. More like the sky itself was paying attention. The man swallowed hard. "And you survived there for 7 years?" Her eyes drifted downward. 7 years here doesn't mean 7 years there." The co-pilot shivered. "So why come back? Why now? Why this flight?" Because I heard something, she whispered. Something I hoped I'd never hear again. She reached for the radio frequency list, scrolling until she found it. The same strange number she had used minutes earlier. When I was there, she said softly, I learned that the signal only goes out when something is unstable. When something is crossing between the two skies. The man frowned. Crossing? She nodded, her voice tightening. Sometimes. For reasons we don't fully understand. The boundary between our sky and that other place becomes thin, weak, when it does. Pilot-strained minds, trained senses feel it first. That's why the pilots collapsed. The co-pilot asked. That's why they felt overwhelmed, she corrected. Their minds were touched by something they weren't prepared to sense. Passengers murmured anxiously again. The man tried to piece everything together. So you heard the signal because something is happening again? Yes, she whispered. Something is opening. The co-pilot shook his head. Opening where? She turned the auxiliary display to show a faint, shifting pattern like a soft pulse in the air, invisible to the naked eye but detected by instruments. Right in front of us, she said. A hush fell over the cabin. Passengers leaned forward. Someone whispered, What is that? It's the same pattern we saw 7 years ago, she explained. Only this time, it's weaker, more unstable, which means. The man held his breath. It wasn't meant to open today. She finished that. The co-pilot stared in fear. Then why is it opening? She looked directly at the man beside her, her eyes filled with the truth she had been hiding since she stepped out of the cockpit door. Because I'm here, she whispered. It responded to me. The man's heart dropped. The passengers went completely silent. The sky outside the window shimmered, just barely, for half a second before returning to normal. But the passengers who saw it gasped in shock. Something was waiting, something she had escaped, and now it had followed her back. No one in the cabin moved, not even the children. Fear had turned into something heavier, quiet, breathless anticipation. They were trapped between two skies, between what they understood and what she alone had lived through. The man with the gift stood beside her, feeling the air shift ever so slightly, like the pressure before a storm. The faint shimmer outside the window vanished, but its memory stayed alive in the passenger's wide eyes. What followed you? The man asked quietly. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to choose the right words simple enough for human ears, but truthful enough not to mislead. When I disappeared, she said softly, I didn't crash. I crossed a boundary, not a physical line, but a place where the sky bends, a place that listens. Passengers leaned forward again, silent but hungry for understanding. The moment my plane crossed it, she continued, something noticed. Me. Not as a person, not as a pilot, just as a presence that didn't belong there. The co-pilot swallowed. A presence? You mean something alive? Alive is the closest word, she said. But it didn't think the way living things think. It wasn't hostile, but it was curious. The man took a slow breath. Curious about what? About why a human aircraft had entered its space, she said. And why I was at the controls. Passengers shifted nervously. In that place time doesn't move like ours, she continued. I felt like I lived only a few months. But the world here lived 7 years. The cabin fell into a stunned silence. The man whispered, Did you ever think you'd return? She turned her gaze to the window, her expression hollow. Every day. And never. Passengers watched her, sensing a deep fatigue in her, the kind that comes from carrying a truth alone for too long. When the signal broke through again, she said, I felt it immediately, that same pull, that same attention. The co-pilot frowned, like, it recognized you? Yes, she whispered. It recognized my presence on this earth again. A murmur spread through the passengers, fear mixed with awe. But why did it affect our pilots? The co-pilot asked, his voice still weak. She looked at him with empathy. It was trying to understand the minds operating this aircraft. And because you were closest to the controls, you felt the impact. The man stepped closer. And you didn't? She hesitated, and in that hesitation, he understood. It didn't affect you because you've already been there. Her silence confirmed it. Passengers gasped. The reality settled heavily. She was not just a returning pilot. She was someone altered by the sky she entered. Someone who no longer reacted the same way human pilots did. The co-pilot slowly nodded, understanding dawning on his tired face. You're connected to that place now. Not by choice, she whispered, but yes. The aircraft hummed steadily, but the air inside felt fragile. Everyone wondered the same thing. Would the sky open again? And what would it want? The auxiliary navigation display pulsed faintly, the soft shimmering pattern drifting across the screen like slow-moving waves. She watched it carefully, her hand hovering over the controls. It's not fully open, she said. Not yet. It's unstable, like it's trying to decide whether to connect or close. Can you stop it? The man asked. I don't know, she replied honestly. 7 years ago, I had no choice. This time, maybe I do. She took a deep breath, then turned to him. But I need you to understand something. His heart thudded. Tell me. When? I disappeared, she said, her voice soft and uneven. I didn't send a goodbye. Not because I didn't care, but because I thought I would be back in hours. I thought whatever I was doing would save lives. I thought I'd see you again that same day. His fingers tightened around the small gift box he held. 7 years. Passed here, she whispered. But to me, it felt like a single season. The man's eyes softened with pain. For years he wondered why she left without a final message. Now the truth felt strange and deeply human. I never stopped waiting, he said quietly. She looked away quickly, her eyes shining with something she didn't want passengers to see. But before he could respond, the auxiliary display pulsed. Brighter, one sharp flash of light across the screen. The co-pilot gasped. What does that mean? She leaned forward, reading the shifting data. Her shoulders stiffened. It means the boundary is reacting. Something is reaching for this aircraft again. Passengers froze. Someone whispered, Are we going to disappear like her last flight? No, she said quickly. Not if I take control. She reached for the manual override again, but paused. The shimmer outside the window returned for a moment, stronger than before. A soft ripple passed through the clouds like a curtain moving. Passengers gasped. The man's heart pounded. She stared at the shimmer, her expression calm but filled with a strange acceptance. It's reacting to me, she whispered. It wants to understand why I left. The co-pilot leaned back, frightened. What do we do? She looked at the man with the gift. You have to help me keep everyone calm, she said gently. Because whatever happens next, they can't panic. What is going to happen next? He asked. She turned back to the window. The shimmer grew again. And with a steady, almost trembling breath, she said, I think it's coming to talk to me. A soft trembling passed through the cabin, gentle but unmistakable like the air itself was being pulled in a different direction. Passengers held their breaths, gripping armrests, looking toward the windows where the shimmer had grown brighter. The man with the gift stood close to her, his heart pounding harder with every second. She didn't look afraid. She looked ready. As though she had always known this moment would return. The auxiliary display pulsed again, showing the same unstable pattern, but now it moved with rhythm, as if something on the other side was knocking, softly, waiting for her to respond. The co-pilot whispered, It's communicating, isn't it? Yes, she said gently, but not in words. It doesn't use language the way we do. It senses presence. It feels intention. Passengers murmured nervously. The man stepped closer, keeping his voice low. Why now? Why talk to you in front of all these people? She turned to him, her face calm. It isn't talking to them. It's talking to me. And it's asking a question it couldn't ask last time. What question? She hesitated, and in that moment, she looked almost fragile. It wants to know why I left. The passengers were silent again, watching her with a kind of quiet respect now. She wasn't just a mystery anymore. She was someone carrying an impossible burden, something she never asked for, and yet, somehow returned to face. She lifted the radio microphone, but this time she didn't switch to any frequency. She simply held it lightly, like a reminder of who she once was before her disappearance. She stared at the shimmering sky outside. I left because I belong here, she said softly. Because humans don't stay where time breaks. Because we have families. We have people who wait. We have lives that carry meaning. The shimmer flickered, almost like a response. Passengers gasped quietly. The man watched her, his chest tight. He could see the truth in her eyes. She wasn't speaking to the sky. She was speaking to something deeper, a presence that didn't understand human love, human memory, human loss. She continued, her voice steady but warm. I didn't leave to escape you. I left because my story wasn't finished here. Because I made promises I hadn't kept yet. The man nearly lost his breath hearing those words. The shimmer pulsed. Brighter, a gentle wave moving across the clouds. It's listening, she whispered. The co-pilot cleared his throat weakly. Is it angry? No, she said. It's trying to understand. It always was. She placed her hand over the manual controls. The plane had drifted slightly, like the sky was nudging it without harm. If I don't take control now, she said quietly, it may try to pull us closer. Not out of danger, but out of curiosity. And what happens if we get too close? The man asked. She held his gaze. Then time won't belong to us anymore. A chill went through him, not fear, but deep awareness. Passengers shifted anxiously, but her calm presence kept panic from rising. She leaned forward, took hold of the controls with both hands, and drew a long breath. This time, she whispered, I choose my sky. The shimmer outside grew one last time, almost like a goodbye, before it slowly folded inward, fading until all that remained was ordinary, blue sky and white clouds. The auxiliary display returned to normal. The strange pressure vanished. Passengers exhaled all at once, some crying softly, some laughing with relief, some simply clutching the hands of strangers beside them. The co-pilot sat back, trembling but awake, watching her with admiration. You brought us back, he whispered. No, she said softly. You were always safe. It only needed to hear my answer. The cockpit fell quiet. For the first time since she appeared, she finally allowed herself to relax. Her shoulders lowered, her eyes softened, and the tightness in her jaw released. The man with the gift stepped forward and gently placed the box in front of her. You never opened it, he said quietly. She looked at the small worn package. Something he had carried for 7 years, through grief, through hope, through every moment he wasn't sure she'd ever return. Her voice broke as she asked, Is it really still mine? It always was, he whispered. She opened the lid slowly. Inside was a simple silver pin, her old flight wings, the ones she lost the day she disappeared. He had kept them all this time, repaired them, polished them, hoping one day she would wear them again. Tears filled her eyes, not dramatic, not loud, just quiet and human. I thought I would never earn these back, she said. You earned them twice, he replied softly. Once as a pilot, and once as someone who found her way home. She fastened the wings to her uniform. For the first time in 7 years, she felt whole. The co-pilot smiled weakly. So, what now? She looked around the cockpit, then at the people waiting beyond the door, then finally at the man who never stopped believing she was alive. Now, she said softly, Now we land, we go home. And I tell the world the truth, not everything. Just enough to remind people that the sky still holds mysteries we aren't meant to fear. The man nodded, his heart full. She guided the plane forward. With steady hands, the sky peaceful again. Watching, but no longer calling. And as the aircraft descended toward home, passengers whispered in awe, knowing they had witnessed something no history book could ever explain. She was gone for 7 years. She returned in a single flight, and in that return, she chose her world, her people, her story. She chose them. She chose home.